He almost deleted the message. It arrived late at night, sandwiched between a reminder from his daughter's school and a bank notification. A glossy digital invitation filled the screen, polished fonts, smiling faces from a past he rarely touched. A class reunion. 15 years since graduation. The kind of event built on nostalgia, ego, and selective memory. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Back then, he had been invisible by design. Quiet. Always sitting near the window, notebooks filled with neat handwriting, eyes down when the laughter turned sharp. Not bullied outright, nothing so dramatic, but constantly reminded that he didn't belong. His clothes were always a season behind. His lunches were simple. When others talked about vacations, he talked about work. When they joked about the future, his was already heavy with responsibility. He hadn't planned to remember any of this tonight. From the hallway came the soft sound of bare feet. His daughter appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair tangled in loose curls. She blinked up at him, small and serious, even half asleep. "Dad?" she murmured. "Why are you still awake?" He locked his phone and smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Come here." She climbed onto the couch beside him, curling against his side as if the world made more sense that way. He wrapped an arm around her, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and bedtime warmth. "Are you going somewhere tomorrow?" she asked. "Why do you think that?" "You only look at your phone like that when you're deciding something," she said simply. He chuckled under his breath. Kids noticed everything. "Maybe," he said. "Just people from a long time ago. Were they nice to you?" The question landed harder than expected. He thought of the smiles that never reached eyes. The jokes disguised as teasing. The way teachers praised him quietly while classmates rolled their eyes. He thought of sitting alone during lunch, not because no one would sit with him, but because sitting alone was easier than pretending not to hear the whispers. "They were themselves," he said carefully. She nodded as if that explained everything. After a moment, her breathing evened out again. He waited until she was fully asleep before lifting her gently and carrying her to bed. Back in the living room, the invitation glowed again. He told himself he didn't need this. He had built a life that made sense. A routine centered on school pickups, homework, late-night emails, and early morning calls across time zones. His world was small by choice and rich where it mattered. Still, something tugged at him. Not pride. Not revenge. Closure. The next evening, he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie. The suit was simple, well-fitted, dark. No visible labels. No flash. The kind of suit chosen by someone who understood the difference between looking expensive and being comfortable. He glanced at his reflection. Same calm eyes. Same steady posture. Just a few more lines at the corners now. "You got this," he muttered, not because he was nervous, but because habit had taught him to encourage himself when no one else would. The venue was downtown, all glass and polished stone, valet parking, soft music drifting into the night. Laughter spilled from the entrance, loud and unrestrained. He paused before stepping inside, letting the noise wash over him. Nothing here could hurt him anymore, he reminded himself. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. Former classmates clustered in groups, drinks in hand, voices overlapping as they compared careers, houses, lifestyles. Suits were sharper than necessary. Dresses sparkled just enough to demand attention. Success was being worn like armor. He took a few steps in, scanning faces. Some he recognized instantly. Others took a moment, softened by time or sharpened by ambition. Then someone noticed him. "Well, I'll be damned," a voice called out. "Look who actually showed up." Heads turned. Smiles flickered, some genuine, most curious, a few amused in a way that made his shoulders tense automatically before he forced them to relax. "Didn't think you were the reunion type," another said, stepping closer. The handshake was firm, a little too firm. A dominance check disguised as friendliness. "Life's full of surprises," he replied mildly. Someone laughed. "Man, you haven't changed at all." He smiled. He had, but not in ways they would recognize. They asked the usual questions. Where are you working? Still in the city? Married? When he mentioned his daughter, eyebrows lifted. Sympathy crept in uninvited. That must be rough, someone said, clucking their tongue. Doing it all alone. It's the best part of my life, he replied. That answer seemed to confuse them. They ushered him toward a large table in the center of the room. Prime spot. Everyone could see it. He realized then that this wasn't kindness, it was positioning. The quiet one placed where he could be observed, measured, discussed. Drinks arrived. Toasts were made. Stories unfolded. I just closed on my third property. Our firm's expanding to Europe. Remember when we thought this place was everything? Laughter followed each boast, loud and affirming. Every now and then, someone glanced at him, waiting for his contribution. He offered polite nods. Short responses. He didn't volunteer details. So, one of them finally said, leaning back in his chair, eyes scanning him openly. What about you? What have you been up to all these years? There it was. The question wasn't curiosity. It was an invitation to compare. He set his glass down carefully. Work. Family. A pause. That's it? Someone asked, incredulous. He shrugged lightly. That's enough. The organizer of the reunion stood up then, tapping his glass with a grin that felt rehearsed. All right, since we're all here celebrating how far we've come, he announced, let's do something fun. One by one, biggest achievement since graduation. Let's start easy. Eyes flicked toward him. He felt the shift immediately. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. A familiar sensation rose in his chest, the old pressure, the unspoken expectation to perform, to justify his existence in a room that had never truly made space for him. He took a slow breath. If they wanted a show, they would get honesty instead. He stood. The room quieted, curiosity sharpening into anticipation. My biggest achievement? He said calmly. I became the kind of father my daughter can be proud of. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. A few smiles froze in place. Someone cleared their throat. That wasn't the answer they were waiting for. He sat back down, unbothered, while murmurs resumed around him, some dismissive, some uncertain. He checked his phone beneath the table. A message from the sitter confirmed his daughter was asleep. That was all the reassurance he needed. He didn't know it yet, but the night had only just begun. The laughter didn't fully come back after that. It tried to. Someone cracked a joke too loudly. Another raised a glass and forced a cheer. But the moment had shifted, like a hairline crack spreading across polished glass. His answer lingered in the air, uncomfortable because it couldn't be measured or topped. They moved on anyway. Conversation rolled forward with renewed urgency, as if speed could bury the awkwardness. Success stories grew sharper, more embellished. Numbers got bigger. Titles got longer. Every sentence seemed to end with a glance in his direction, checking whether the message had landed. He listened without interrupting. Years of boardrooms and negotiations had taught him when silence was more powerful than speech. So yeah, one of them said, leaning back, clearly enjoying the attention. After bonuses, it's looking like 7 figures this year. Applause rippled around the table. Another chimed in. Man, remember when we used to stress over test scores? Now it's all about portfolio performance. Laughter again. This time it held an edge. Someone turned to him. You must miss the freedom, though. No late nights, no pressure. Just simple living. The words were wrapped in a smile, but the implication was clear. Less ambition. Less achievement. Less worth. He met the man's eyes calmly. I don't miss much, he said. The man blinked, thrown off by the lack of defensiveness. A server arrived with appetizers, arranging plates with practiced precision. The smell barely registered. He wasn't hungry. Across the table, a woman he barely remembered studied him more openly than the others. Her gaze flicked from his suit to his hands, to the watch he wore. Plain. Unbranded. She frowned slightly, as if a detail didn't fit the picture she'd already drawn. You always were mysterious, she said. Never shared much. Guess some habits stick. He smiled faintly. Some things are private. She laughed. Still secretive. You know, these days transparency is everything. He thought of balance sheets, acquisition talks, NDAs stacked thicker than textbooks. He thought of protecting his daughter's privacy, her normal childhood, her freedom to be unknown. Not everything needs an audience, he replied. That seemed to irritate a few people. The organizer leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. Look, man, no judgment. We're just glad you came. It takes guts, you know? Walking into a room like this after everything. Everything? He asked, genuinely curious. Well, the organizer shrugged. Life didn't exactly play fair for everyone. There it was. Pity masquerading as kindness. He nodded slowly. Life's been fair to me. The organizer laughed, assuming it was a joke. As the evening wore on, the comments grew bolder. Drinks loosened tongues. Politeness thinned. Someone asked if his daughter's mother was still around, then immediately followed it with, must be tough explaining things to her. Another suggested a charity that helped people like him get back on their feet. Each remark landed softly but persistently, like rain wearing down stone. He didn't react. That, more than anything, seemed to frustrate them. At some point, the conversation shifted to investments. Startups. Angel funding. A few names were dropped, spoken with reverence. The table leaned in collectively, the way people do when they believe they're among peers. I've been trying to get into Blackridge, one said casually. Impossible. Those guys don't even respond. Another scoffed. Yeah, unless you're already somebody, forget it. Someone else laughed. I heard the main backer is some ghost. Never shows up. Never talks. Just moves money. He took a sip of water. Probably hiding because he knows people would beg him for favors, the organizer said. Smart, honestly. They laughed. He set his glass down. The irony was almost poetic. A waiter approached, murmuring something to the organizer, who waved him away impatiently. Later, the organizer snapped. We're in the middle of something. The waiter hesitated, eyes flicking briefly to him, then nodded and retreated. That moment didn't go unnoticed. You know, one of them said suddenly, voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. We should do something memorable tonight. Like old times. A few people perked up. What are you thinking? The organizer's grin widened. Remember senior year, when we did that impromptu awards thing? Funniest, smartest, most likely to succeed? Groans and laughs erupted. We should do that again, he continued. Just for laughs. Eyes turned toward him again, sharper now. Oh, this I've gotta see. Someone chuckled. He felt it then, not fear, not anger, but the familiar sensation of being positioned as the punchline. Let's start with most successful, the organizer said, raising his glass. Easy one. They all named the same person. Cheers followed. Cameras came out. The winner stood, bowing exaggeratedly. No, the organizer continued. Most humble. Laughter erupted. Someone glanced at him, then quickly looked away. He sat still. And finally, the organizer said, dragging the moment out, most unchanged. The laughter this time was louder, less subtle. A few people looked directly at him now, some smiling, some waiting, some uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. He felt the old room closing in, the desks, the whispers, the unspoken hierarchy. But this wasn't then. He stood slowly, not rushed, not reactive. The organizer froze mid-sentence. I think I should head out, he said calmly. It's getting late. A few people protested weakly. Already? Come on, stay. The organizer forced a laugh. Hey, no need to be sensitive. We're just having fun. He met the man's eyes. So am I. There was something in his tone that made the organizer falter. He reached for his coat, slipping it on with unhurried precision. Conversations around the table had stalled. Nearby guests were watching now, sensing tension. As he turned to leave, the organizer spoke again, louder this time, trying to reclaim control. Hey, he called. Before you go, what do you even do these days anyway? The question echoed across the room. Dozens of eyes locked onto him. For the first time that night, the room went completely quiet. He paused at the edge of the light, hand resting on the back of his chair. For a split second, memories flashed, being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. Then he smiled. Enough, he said. Confusion rippled through the crowd. He stepped away from the table and walked toward the exit, the sound of his footsteps steady against the polished floor. Behind him, whispers erupted. What did he mean by that? Enough for what? Did you notice that waiter earlier? He didn't hear them. Outside, the night air was cool and grounding. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. A message waited. One word. Arrived. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, unaware that everything they thought they knew about him was about to collapse. And inside, the laughter hadn't returned. It wouldn't. He had barely reached the curb when the doors behind him opened again. At first, he didn't turn. He assumed it was another guest stepping out for air, another laugh spilling into the night. Then he heard his name. Not shouted. Not rushed. Spoken with certainty. He stopped. The voice carried authority without effort, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. He turned slowly. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood just inside the entrance, phone still in hand, eyes fixed on him. The suit wasn't flashy, but everything about it fit perfectly. The man's posture was relaxed, confident, as if he belonged anywhere he chose to stand. There you are, the man said, smiling. I was beginning to think I'd miss you. For a split second, confusion flickered across the man's face. Then recognition snapped into place. You're early, he replied calmly. Couldn't risk traffic, the man said. Tonight mattered. Inside the lounge, conversations faltered. People had noticed the pause, the way the air seemed to shift. A few heads turned toward the door. Then more. The man stepped fully into the light. Whispers rippled through the room. Isn't that? No way. What's he doing here? Someone at the table went pale. The organizer stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. Excuse me, he said, forcing a smile as he hurried toward the entrance. Sir, this is a private event. The man in the suit didn't even look at him. He walked straight past, stopping in front of the quiet single dad they'd spent the night dissecting. Sorry for the delay, the man said. The board call ran longer than expected. A hush fell over the room. He nodded. I figured. The man extended his hand. Everything okay in here? He shook it firmly. Everything's fine. The handshake alone told a story, mutual respect, familiarity, balance. It wasn't the greeting of strangers. The organizer's smile twitched. I'm sorry, he interjected nervously. But you two know each other? The man finally turned, eyebrow lifting slightly. Know him? He glanced back at the quiet man, then laughed softly. He's the reason my company survived its first year. Silence crashed down like a dropped curtain. Someone gasped. Another person let out a nervous laugh that died immediately. The man continued, voice steady, unbothered by the effect his words were having. He funded our initial expansion. Rewrote our risk model. Connected us to partners we didn't even know we needed. He placed a hand lightly on the quiet man's shoulder. This, he said, is the majority shareholder of Blackridge Capital. The name landed like thunder. Chairs shifted. Glasses froze midair. Faces drained of color. That's not funny, someone whispered. The organizer swallowed hard. Blackridge, as in that Blackridge? Yes, the man replied coolly. That Blackridge. The woman who had been studying him earlier stared openly now, eyes locked on his watch, his suit, every detail she'd dismissed as ordinary. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Someone at the table stammered. But, he said he just worked. Family. That's it. He smiled gently. That is it. The man in the suit glanced around the room, finally taking in the expressions: shock, disbelief, sudden recalculation. What's going on? He asked casually. Did I interrupt something? No, the organizer said quickly. Too quickly. We were just reminiscing. Ah, the man said. Reunions. Always interesting. He turned back to the quiet man. You leaving already? I was about to, he replied. That's a shame, the man said. I was hoping to introduce you properly. The organizer laughed weakly. Introduce him? I mean, we all know him. We went to school together. The man tilted his head. Then you know how impressive this is. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen once before holding it up. The display showed a familiar headline, an acquisition announcement, a valuation figure highlighted in bold. 9 digits. A collective inhale swept the room. Someone dropped their glass. It shattered, the sound sharp and final. I don't understand, another murmured. Why didn't you ever say anything? He answered without hesitation. No one ever asked? The room shifted again. This time, it was heavier. The organizer tried to recover, stepping closer, voice suddenly warm. Man, wow! That's incredible. You should have told us. We would have. Would have what? He asked quietly. The man stopped mid-sentence. You invited me tonight because you remembered who I used to be, he continued calmly. Not because you were curious about who I became. No one argued. The man in the suit crossed his arms, eyes scanning the table. I was under the impression this was a friendly gathering. It is, the organizer insisted. We were just joking around. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Jokes usually make everyone laugh. A few people looked down at their hands. One of the louder classmates cleared his throat. So, you're really worth. He didn't answer. The man in the suit did. Just over 100 million, last valuation. Though he'd tell you that number doesn't matter. Every assumption they'd carried began to collapse in real time. The quiet one. The struggling single dad. The man they pitied. None of it fit anymore. The woman who had offered charity earlier stepped forward hesitantly. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. He met her gaze, expression unreadable. You knew enough to decide how you treated me. That stung. The organizer tried one last time, desperation creeping into his voice. Look, if this is about earlier. It's not, he interrupted gently. This isn't about revenge. The man in the suit raised an eyebrow, curious. He continued, voice steady but firm. This is about clarity. I came tonight to see if anything had changed. He looked around the table. The silence answered for him. I have a daughter, he said. She's watching how I move through the world. How I respond when people underestimate me. He straightened his jacket. I wanted to show her that dignity doesn't depend on approval. The man in the suit nodded slowly, clearly impressed. The organizer's shoulders slumped. The power he'd held at the table evaporated completely. So, what now? Someone asked quietly. He glanced toward the door. No, he said. I go home. The man in the suit smiled. Same time next week? He nodded. After her recital. They turned toward the exit together. Behind them, the room remained frozen, laughter gone, confidence shattered, egos stripped bare. They had invited him to be mocked. Instead, they had been exposed. And they knew, with sinking certainty, that the final lesson hadn't even been delivered yet. The room stayed silent long after the doors closed behind him. No one rushed to speak. No one laughed. The shattered glass on the floor felt symbolic now, fragments of something that could not be put back together. The organizer stood frozen near the center, hands clenched, staring at the entrance as if expecting the night to rewind itself. It didn't. People began shifting uncomfortably. Chairs scraped softly. A few guests avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their phones. The confidence they had worn so proudly earlier felt cheap now, like a costume taken off too late. "Did that really just happen?" someone whispered. Another replied, barely audible. "We mocked a man who could buy this whole place." The organizer swallowed hard. His reflection stared back at him from the glass wall, smaller somehow. He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that died halfway out. "Well," he said weakly, "that escalated." No one joined in. The woman who had studied him earlier sat down slowly, hands trembling just enough to notice. She replayed every word she'd said to him, every look she'd given. The charity comment burned in her chest now, shame crawling up her spine. "I treated him like he was invisible," she murmured. "You treated him like he was beneath you," someone corrected quietly. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent. He stood by the curb as the valet pulled up a modest car. Nothing flashy. No custom plates. No attention-grabbing shine. The man in the tailored suit glanced at it, amused. "You know," he said, "people expect something louder." He smiled. "Loud things attract the wrong kind of attention." They got in, the door closing with a soft, final sound. As the car moved through the streets, the tension he hadn't realized he was carrying began to loosen. He rested his head back, exhaling slowly. "You okay?" the man asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Better than I thought I'd be." "You didn't have to stay that calm," the man said. "Most people would have enjoyed that moment." "I didn't go there for them," he said simply. The man nodded, understanding. At home, the lights were dim. The sitter had left a note on the counter. She asked for you before she fell asleep. He smiled as he picked it up, folding it carefully and slipping it into his pocket. He walked down the hallway quietly, opening his daughter's door just enough to see her curled under the blanket, one arm flung over her stuffed toy. He stood there for a long moment, letting the stillness settle. This was the only audience that mattered. The next morning, the fallout began. Messages poured in. Some clumsy apologies. Some awkward congratulations. A few requests disguised as reconnections. He didn't reply to most of them. He wasn't angry. Anger required energy he no longer needed to spend. One message did catch his attention, though. Short. Direct. "I owe you an apology. No excuses. If you ever want to talk." He closed the app. Later that week, the organizer sat alone in his office, staring at his laptop screen. An email draft sat unfinished. He'd rewritten it 5 times already. Every version sounded hollow. He finally deleted it. For the first time in years, he questioned the story he told himself about success. About who deserved respect. About how easily he had mistaken volume for value. Across the city, in a small school auditorium, a girl stood nervously behind a curtain, clutching sheet music. She peeked out at the audience, eyes scanning the rows until they landed on him. Her face lit up. He smiled back, giving her a thumbs up. When she played, her fingers shook at first, then steadied. The notes filled the room, imperfect but brave. He listened like it was the most important performance in the world. When the applause came, it was loud. Proud. She ran to him afterward, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You were incredible," he said, kneeling to her level. "I'm proud of you." Her smile made everything else irrelevant. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked at him thoughtfully. "Dad," she said, "why do some people talk so loud about what they have?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people talk loud because they're trying to convince themselves." She nodded, absorbing it. "And you?" she asked. "You don't talk loud." He brushed her hair back gently. "I don't need to." Weeks passed. The reunion faded into a story others whispered about. A cautionary tale. A reminder. For him, it became something simpler. Proof. Proof that patience had been worth it. That silence had protected what mattered. That dignity didn't require an audience, and power didn't need permission. One evening, as he watched his daughter doing homework at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed. A notification confirmed a deal finalized overseas. Numbers moved. Influence expanded. He set the phone face down and helped her with a math problem instead. Somewhere downtown, the lounge hosted another event. Laughter echoed again, but it sounded different now, careful, measured. People glanced around more before speaking. Titles were mentioned less. Listening mattered more. Because once, the quietest man in the room had stood up and reminded them all. The loudest success fades fast. But the kind built in silence lasts long enough to change everything.